Hello, this is Sergio Marrero here with Rebel One Live. Today we have a special guest, Samara Hernandez. She is founding partner at Chingona Ventures. Previously, she's also one of the board members of Angeles Investors. She's a graduate of Kellogg's MBA program at Northwestern University. Thank you for joining us today, Samara.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So we'll dive right in, I would love for you to share a little bit more about Chingona Ventures, and for those that those that don't know what Chingona means, and for the Latin community that may have never heard of a fund called Chingona Ventures, I want you to share a little color around that.
Yeah, so Chingona means badass woman in Spanish, and particularly Mexican slang. And it's used as an endearing term nowadays to describe just a badass woman. And I named the fund Chingona Ventures because I'm investing in badass founders. And the fund was started because I was in venture 5 years prior to starting my own fund. And I had seen the types of founders that were getting funded, the types of industries, the types of business models. And I saw an opportunity to go one earlier, two in industries that weren't well understood or people didn't try to understand. And also with founders that came from a different background or didn't have the right resources to get venture capital, but they had really good businesses that were growing that could scale to be really big. And they just needed some additional capital early on and an additional network to mentor them throughout their entire process.
Great. And then also alluding to Samara is a badass, just in case anyone was wondering. So that is for sure. And also I failed to mention that previously principal and venture partner at Math Ventures. If you can, before we go into your background, can you share a little color on what type of founders you invest in, like what size check and
absolutely.
Beyond that, yeah.
Yeah, so I invest in pre-seed, typically to seed stage founders. So that's when a company has raised less than $1 million in outside funding. So usually I'm one of the first institutional checks. My check size is 100 to 250,000. I try to stay under a 10 million pre-money valuation. Pre-COVID, it was hard. After COVID, it's okay. I'm industry agnostic, but I really like industries in fintech, future of work, femtech, food, wellness and health, and edtech. And some of those industries are actually doing well during COVID. I don't only invest in women and minorities. I have white males in my portfolio, but I do work very hard to ensure that my deal flow has at least 50% underrepresented groups, which ultimately translates to who is in my portfolio. So I'm based in Chicago, but I invest all over the United States. And I launched last year. I've made 10 investments so far in founders, and I'm looking to make 15 to 20 more.
Awesome. Great. And can you share a little bit about how did you get to start your own fund? I know previously you were at Goldman Sachs, and then you eventually shifted into venture. Can you share more about your journey?
Yeah, so it's a non-traditional VC journey. So I guess the way beginning was I was born in Mexico, just an hour south of Mexico City. And I came to the United States when I was young, and we lived the whole immigrant story. My parents worked minimum wage jobs, and they worked really hard for us to get an education. So I was fortunate that unfortunate that I didn't know the language English very well until 5th grade. So I was putting the ESL, so I was a little bit behind, but I excelled in math. And so that led me to eventually pursue an engineering degree at University of Michigan, which led me to Goldman Sachs back in 04, 05. And I was there through the financial crisis, which as an engineer, I was put into tech and operations, and then I switched into a sales role. And that was very different, going from knowing the numbers and being very exact to communicating and telling a story and building a relationship with your clients. So I did that for almost a decade and went to Kellogg for my MBA, and then did an internship in early stage investing, fell in love with it, graduated without a job. And so I hustled my way through. And I always tell this to a lot of the MBA interns that I work with. It's not, at the time, it was 6 years ago, so not a lot of the jobs were posted, especially in Chicago. So you just kind of had to network and do the job before you actually did it. I worked with a lot of startups and did anything I could, financial models, putting presentations together, customer reference calls. And then Mark Eckler and Troy Hennekoff, who had just started Math Venture Partners, I got connected to them, and they gave me my first job in venture. And Dana Wright was also there, joined shortly with me, and they were great to work with for 5-6 years. And then I just saw a big need in this space, and that's where I launched my own fund, and the Illinois Growth and Innovation Fund here in Illinois was incredible, resource for me, and because of them, I was able to launch my own fund. So I have to make sure that I give them a shout out, because they're an incredible group of people.
That's great. And how did what was the strategy at Math Ventures, and how is that different from your fund? When you say you saw an opportunity, can you share more about that?
Yeah, so I saw many funds in Chicago, in general, were focused a little bit later. So Series A, I guess now would be seed, but at the time it was called Series A. So in markets that were not mature, there was less angel money and there was less early stage money going in. So going into pre-product, pre-revenue companies was pretty much unheard of. And so I started mentoring these companies with office hours and with women tech founders and with a bunch of other groups, the Latinx incubator. And I realized that, I gave them a lot of feedback, and not everybody had a venture backable business. It was a lifestyle business or something else. But those that did found it very hard to navigate the venture capital community. And many times they would go outside of the Midwest and get funding. And so I said, you know what, there's only so much advice you can give founders. They really need capital to grow their business. And so that's why I launched the fund.
That's great. And can you share more about your, in doing it? Can you share more the nuance? Because I know during the experience, you're the sole partner, right?
Yes.
In Chingona? Yeah. So can you talk about the decision of founding as a sole partner? What can you share more about why you did that, and what are the benefits and drawbacks of doing that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because you're starting to see a lot of emerging managers, we call them, which is different people describe the term different ways, but it's typically funds that are, call it, less than 100 million, some less than 25 million, or I guess micro VC funds, that you're starting to see investors leave bigger funds and go launch their own funds with their own thesis. Pre-COVID, you saw a lot more of that happening. And a lot of times the fund size determines, how many GP general partners can be in the fund. So for me, it made sense to be a sole GP right now, be able to make quicker decisions given the stage and the types of founders I invest in. I still do the full diligence, and I actually have a wonderful team of interns that help me do a lot of the process. We do the investment memo, we do all the diligence. Sometimes we lead deals. But for me, it made more sense to be a sole GP for this fund. That being said, I would ultimately like to create an enterprise and grow into Fund 2, Fund 3, Fund 4, Fund 5. And with that, I know I need partners. And so right now, I don't have any official GPs, but I obviously have a great community of investor friends that we co-invest, we share deals, we talk through an investment. I have a great unofficial group of advisors that I talk to all the time about my deals. But what I'd like to do is bring on another general partner for Fund 2, and then hopefully, at some point bring on some additional partners and team members if it makes sense. But I really think that a small, lean team can make quicker decisions, especially when you're at the pre-seed level, when you don't have much to work off of. And, founders also need some additional support, and you can leverage your network to connect them with that support.
I love that. and especially it's a startup unto itself.
That's
uh,
exactly it.
so
We have a
starting.
lot of the same things. I have to fundraise myself. I have to think about my brand. I have to, my customers are my portfolio companies essentially, right? So
Uh, I also know that I've seen you speak at in Chicago at some of the LP events that they have there, and so your Chingona's out there and Samara's out there. Can you share more about doing this experience? I haven't prefaced this before, but as a mom, right? You just
yeah.
became a mom like during that experience. How did that influence or affect your journey?
So what's interesting is that pre-starting my own fund, I remember a situation where I was at my last fund and I had back-to-back meetings, and there was somebody that checked in to see me, and I was like, "You're not on my calendar, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to cancel. I don't have you on my. Maybe somebody double booked me," and she was like, "No, I don't have a meeting with you. I have back-to-back meetings, and I just had my baby, and I need to pump, and all the VCs that I'm meeting with are all men, so I don't know who to ask, and I saw your name, so I'm asking if you know where the lactation room is here." And I was just like, "Oh, okay, let me figure it out. I don't know, but let me help you." And she felt comfortable with me to do that, and I felt really good about that. And I didn't realize the struggle of having a child and the pumping and the nursing and the whole thing until I had my own. And interestingly enough, I raised my fund while I was pregnant. It wasn't, I mean, I didn't intend to do it both at the same time. The fundraising was taking longer, and then I got pregnant, and a beautiful surprise, obviously. But um, I was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I was like, "Oh my goodness!" I've heard all these horror stories of like people not funding you because they think you're going to be a stay-at-home mom or you're not dedicated. And my LP was so incredible. I literally almost like cried telling him, that I was pregnant. He's like, "Oh, congrats. Okay, let's move on." And I negotiated the equivalent of a term sheet after 2 weeks, or no, not 2 weeks, 2 days after I gave birth to my son. I think I was on the adrenaline rush from having a child. I'm not sure what it was, but and I had a great lawyer who kind of pushed the process through. And then I had a team at Math too that I created my own maternity policy. Thank goodness. I mean, I know a lot of people don't have that. My mom didn't with me. She had to go back to work right away. So I'm grateful and I'm thankful for that. But I do now, when I meet new moms, as part of my, pre-COVID, when we were meeting in person, and part of my invite, I just did a quick like, "Hey, if you need a pump, if you need somewhere to nurse, if you have something else, another disability, if you want me to come to you, if you're pregnant," because I know walking, being 9 months pregnant in the summer, it sucks, And so I just did something small that I thought would help, and I got a lot of feedback from people that were moms, not moms, and just I think that if you want to have a different experience for founders, if you want to attract a certain type of founder, you need to be open to what they're going through. And for me to meet at their office versus my office, it wasn't a big deal, right? And so I'm grateful that I was able to bring in some founders that are parents, and one that was pregnant and while she was fundraising, and I hope to do more of that.
And no, this is it's amazing that you said it's the little things, right? Like just letting them know where that is and integrating that's what you do that can make the whole experience more inclusive for all founders. So no, that's great. I also want to dovetail, given the subject, into not ignoring the current events of the protests that are all around. Focusing on the atrocities with George Floyd, and standing up for the Black community. And I wanted to talk about racism, diversity, bias in venture itself. So can you share more about? I know we spoke a little bit about the diversity of your portfolio and how you see and manage that.
Yeah. So let's just start with the facts. I think the last number was less than 3% of all venture money goes to women and minorities. Minorities is less than 1%. And I think women of color, I believe, is less than 1%, less than 1.1%. Like it's not even, it's so small you can't even really count it. And it's insane to me. And it's been that way for many, many years. And there's been a lot of movements the last few years that have focused on this, and a lot of great organizations that have come up from that. But the reality is that it's slow to change. And I saw that in the portfolios that I was looking at, in the companies that I was looking at. And I don't believe that people are intentionally saying, you're this, I'm not going to invest in you. If you give people the benefit of the doubt. But I do, there's something missing because venture funding hasn't gone to these groups. And what I have noticed is that if you are committed to it, not just for the sake of commitment or for the genuine, good of the community and whatever else, but if you want to see all the deals out there that could be the winners in your portfolio, you need to go out there and see all the deals, not from one type of founder, not from one type of industry. And you need to be very intentional about it. And what I realized is that when I went out and did events and I did mentors or office hours, I found that the deal flow increased in the portfolio slightly. So it was doing something, but not enough, obviously. And but when I started to make those investments, actually write a check, people, and hopefully they had a good experience with the whole investing process, those CEOs would bring in their network. And even people that I didn't invest in. As a matter of fact, some of the best deals that I've gotten have been from women of color. And I'm just, it was, I pulled the numbers in the first quarter and I'm just like, wow, and so for me, I think you need to be really intentional about it. And there's been, people kind of doing pledges and doing all this other stuff, but until you actually make an action towards saying, okay, you know what? We realize we're not diverse in our portfolio. We realize we're not diverse on our team. And it's not just one type of diversity, right? It's bringing in people of color as well. And other, underrepresented groups, to really bring in different voices to the table, to bring in different networks so that we can see more deals and make better investments. Because the reality is that venture funds many times don't have outsized returns. It's limited to a few that really, drive the returns for the industry. And so I think, how I've thought about it is that, well, if I have a different approach, if I look at these founders that others say they're too early, I don't get the market, whatever other excuse, I'm going to find these opportunities early that others won't find. And I can help de-risk that investment by giving them money, obviously capital, but also a network, and preparing them for the next raise and making those introductions and working on behalf of them. So I think that's that part I'm doing on my end, but ultimately it comes with the LPs, the limited partners that invest in these funds. And not many people have talked about it. I've seen a few tweets the last few days where people have started to talk about it, because if my investor is telling me, just giving me money and doesn't necessarily care where the returns come from, we're in the business of making money and getting outsized returns. So I'm going to go find the best returns that I can possibly find. And that might just be in my network. And if my network and my team, if me and my team kind of look the same and we're from the same school and we come from the same company, we're going to have the same types of people that we're going to invest in. And I've had other funds say, look, like, I'm going to invest in my friends, or I only invest people from this certain school. And I've had LPs tell me, like, we don't really care, And so I think some of that is changing. And like, for instance, with my LP, who is thinking about this very differently and allocating dollars to different types of fund managers, to get them going and to make investments and to start getting it in the community. So I think it's one, being intentional from the fund level, and then on the LP side is thinking about your fund dollars in a very different way, and starting to be very proactive about reaching out to these fund managers, because I can tell you there's a ton that are coming out to market that are starting, have this thesis that look very different. And the more dollars that they get, the more dollars that will ultimately go into these founders.
Got it. And for you, can you talk about how, I mean, you've laid the groundwork for how we've seen, this bias reveal itself in capital allocation. How else have you seen it appear, if at all?
A lot of times I see that founders, particularly of color, but women as well, but they need to have more traction. They're always too early. I get so many. They're too early for me, but so I get that a lot. I don't know how I want to call it, because I don't believe that people are really, if I at least the people I've met are intentionally not trying to invest in a certain type of founder. But I have noticed, a founder come through that pitched on almost an idea. Well, actually, it was an idea. They had nothing. Get $3 million from their friends, and then have women that have grown their business week over week and have proven out so much traction and can barely get a couple $100,000. As a matter of fact, there was one woman in my portfolio that when she pitched me back in December, she told me I was her 307th meeting, and she had only raised $350,000. Her husband, who is a white male, had raised $4 million off of a presentation of a deck. And she just kind of said it just like, I mean, I can be mad about it, or I can just get to work. And she's pre-COVID been super capital efficient. She's got incredible unit economics, and she's done so much with very little that she's raised. And now those businesses all of a sudden are more attractive. So that's why I ultimately believe that in my portfolio, I was like, well, my businesses were already super capital efficient. It's not like they had to cut a bunch of people or cut a bunch of burn. They were already, burning minimal. And so I do believe that these founders have an advantage, but, at the same time, they still need capital to continue to grow their business and to position themselves in a competitive way with others in the market. So we'll see how that pans out. But, it's unfortunate, but that's what I've seen.
Awesome. It's not awesome that happened. Awesome you shared it.
Yeah.
I mean, seeing these stories is I've said that to other founders of color what I've shared is I said statistically, if you pitch 100 meetings, and we're only getting such a small slice. I was like, pitch that many meetings to customers.
Right.
And if you can land those, that's great capital, because you're not giving up equity. It's proving out your business. So it's a different way to think about, your best fundraiser is your customer. I always
Oh, totally. Yeah, I just talked to a woman that just has been 7 years in the business, had just over 1.5 million in revenue last year. And she was like, look, I might not look attractive to VCs because I haven't grown as quickly, but exponentially, but I've done this. I'm cash flow positive, and I'm just looking for VC to actually grow and scale. I have a proven model, and this is her first round of funding.
Wow.
Being the CEO. And then I have others that have an idea and just pitched. And so it's I think the more funding that goes into underrepresented founders, the more exits that they have, the more money that they accumulate, they will in turn invest it back as an angel investor or run their own funds into the community. And again, I think a lot of this is wealth creation in our community. In the Black and Brown communities, many of us have grown up. I mean, I grew up you have to save every dime. That there was no, you're going to invest it in the stock market. you're going to save everything. And even my father, who, when I left Goldman Sachs, was like, why are you leaving Goldman? They have good insurance. He's like, what's a venture fund? What do you, and this is a high risk, high return business. And we're not taught many times when we are from certain socioeconomic backgrounds that we should take a risk, that we should, put this investment in high risk, high return asset classes. And so, even people that start moving up in their careers that are even at a corporation, they're less hesitant to leave potentially, or they don't have that income or that cushion that others might have growing up because they have to take care of their families, right? I mean, I'm my parents' 401k, right? Like, and I know that. And so you have less risk takers, or less people that don't know about the industry. So there's angel groups that, you mentioned, that I'm working with here in Chicago to help with that, to help educate people. And
I think it's a great time to dive into that.
Yeah,
So if you want to talk about it, if you want to talk more about Angeles investors, yeah.
Well, so I'm an advisor to Angeles, and so they are a group of angels all over the United States. I think they're starting off in Chicago, and they're investing in Latinx founders. So they just quickly launched last year, and I think you had Marcelo on this, so he'll probably touch more about that. But I think having those groups and just being a part of those conversations. Some of the people, in there were asking about P&L, and I'm like, they don't have a P&L. They have, their pre-product, pre-revenue. They don't have that. And so how do you think about these investments in a very different way? So, I want to help them and participate in these conversations and get more people to start making these investments. I want more women of color, right? I would love it if in my next fund, more women of color, more women, more minorities are LPs, are limited partners in my fund. And that's my ultimate goal, even if it's, a smaller check size, but to start making these investments. If you make a certain amount of money, somebody here in Chicago, a woman I really respect here in Chicago, said, if you make over $100,000, you can write a $10,000 check into a company and start doing that. And it's like, oh, it kind of hurts at first, but that's how you start making these bets. Assume that you're never going to get it back, but there might be that one chance where you do make 100x on it. So I want more of that in our community.
Absolutely. Can you share more on the other initiative you work on, Chicago Blend?
Yeah, so I'm also on the board of Chicago Blend. It was started off by Lindsay Knight from Chicago Ventures, who's an incredible person. And it was really just trying to look at Chicago's tech community and investor community. And it started off by just getting the numbers. So doing a survey and just saying, all right, let's see the breakdown they start off with investors. So who's on your team? Are they women? Are they men? Are they Latinx? Are they Black? Are they, Asian? What are their titles? And, it's no surprise to anybody that the results came back. It's a certain, it skews towards a certain demographic. And so what we wanted to do was say, okay, now that we have the numbers, what are we going to do with it? There's always some sort of action, however small, right? That we need to start working towards to change this. And so we realized that we could start referring more women and minorities into VC companies. We could get a group together and mentor these investors to progress and to get promoted in their VC firms to ultimately start writing checks, start maybe being those decision makers. And then we realized within our portfolio companies that many on the boards were not women and not minority. And so we created a database to start collecting names of women and diverse candidates to start putting them in board positions. And that's really important because at the board level, you're essentially the one helping guide the company and helping with these decisions. And I know I've personally experienced a board role where I was able to help hire the first woman to the company. It was all, white males. It was a great company. I love these guys, and they just didn't have it. And so it's like, okay, let me open up my network. So I helped hire the first woman. I helped interview her, recruit her, and help her get the pay that she needed, because they weren't initially paying her as much as I thought deserved because of a comp, and so helped her get that. So I think it's really important, even at the board level, for portfolio companies to get that. And so Chicago Blend looks at the investor community. We do office hours too with founders. Today we did a run to raise money for some of these organizations that are fighting racial injustice. And then we're doing the board compensation, but what we're doing now, and we're going to have a call I think next week, but we want to understand and first listen to what we can do better, because there's a lot of people that are angry, that are speaking out, that, and some white VCs, I think, are worried about speaking out because they're going to get backlash. And some have spoken out about it. But we as an organization want to unify a message to the Chicago tech community, but also listen and work with Black founders and Black VCs to see what it is that we need to change, because action is our number one mission. Not just stating, not just doing a pledge, but action is what the mission is.
That's awesome. That's great, especially and shifting and looking at specifically the Black community at this time. What actions do you think we can take to better address I used the term systemic racism before. We could talk. We could use bias, but this injustice, right? That's ingrained in the system. How do we not incrementally but dramatically address that in Inventure? Like, if you have any concepts, ideas, things you do at Chingona, I would love to riff about that together.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm speaking about this from a Latina's perspective, right? And so it's one perspective I can talk about how Chingona Ventures is addressing this. I can talk about how my Latinx VC friends that I've been on messages all week with, are trying to do. But ultimately, a lot of times people put Black and brown communities together because a lot of our issues are the same, but and some of them are very, very different. And so we need to support, the brown, the Latinx community needs to support them, and all the communities, right? But I'm speaking it from this perspective. So at Chingona Ventures, let me just kind of break it down. I did the stats this morning, but 50% of our portfolio is women CEOs, 50% is male CEOs, 25% are white, 25% are Black, 50% are Latinx, 10% are Asian, 5% are LGBTQ that I know of because I don't ask that. 40% are immigrant and 15% are moms. So I broke it down even more. So I did this one to say, all right, well, let me look at my portfolio. What am I doing? What am I not doing? And I think that's kind of the first step that we need to do as investors, is look at your current portfolio and say, how many Black CEOs, you could say founders, but really CEOs are in your portfolio. And I tweeted about this earlier, and there's a lot of, kind of back and forth, but okay, that's step one. And then step two is like, okay, be real about it. Don't just put out a message, say we support this and this and that. I mean, maybe you do and you donate, and that we should all be doing that and protesting, but specifically how it relates to our industry is say, all right, well, if we want to change our industry, then being super honest with ourselves, and then saying, okay, well, it's a pretty low, or I may not have any. So let me go out and find these founders that might fit with my thesis. It doesn't mean that you're going to invest in every, founder that you meet. As a matter of fact, 99% of VC conversations end up in a no, but you need to expose yourself to them. You need to get deal flow through the door. And at the partner level, many times they're like, oh yeah, at the junior level, when we've hired our junior, person of color, woman, she goes out and she finds these. No, it has to be throughout the organization at all different levels. And then, obviously bring it through the investment committee. And if you are finding that you're not getting deals through the investment committee, it probably means that there's something going on in the investment committee if you all look the same, if you all have the same backgrounds. Because I've been a part of investment committees that there's just natural bias, right? People just don't get an industry. I've heard that so many times. or they don't believe in the founder's ability to execute. Well, where does that come from, right? And and if you assume good intentions, everyone has these biases. I do, you do, every single person does. So doing that, and then obviously, many VCs don't have a person of color, or maybe have one on their team, and so hiring them, mentoring them, don't just put them as like an assistant, doing admin work, which does happen, but actually put them in roles where they can be successful, they can be on boards, and then bring in their network to hopefully invest in these founders. So I think that it starts with being super honest with yourself, but actually being intentional, and then also working with other investors that are investing in these founders. So from a Latinx perspective, we're having a lot of these conversations right now. And I think it's really important to just say, I can't understand, or I can't imagine what the Black community is feeling right now. It's exhausting. They're tired. I can only speak about my personal racism that I've experienced, but it's nothing compared to, my Black friends and founders. And I think right now, a lot of people just don't know what to do. And so I've reached out to my portfolio companies. I've reached out to my friends and just said, what can we be doing? And I'm listening, and I'm going to be wrong. And I'm probably going to say something that's off, but you know what? I'm okay with that, as long as I'm able to fix it, and as long as I'm able to action it. And so I'm working my ass off to try to do this. And it's just draining, with everything going on. But I'm just know I am working on my end to try to change this as a Latina, as a VC, as a mom of a son, and a 19-month-old son who I can't even imagine, having to worry about him the way, some of my Black mom friends, do with their kids. And so I'm here to listen. I want to help, and I'm providing actionable things to do, but we need to change this. It's enough.
Yeah, no, that's definitely agree. And I appreciate also the like what you said before about being the first step is recognizing, but then being comfortable to talk, saying that the words aren't going to be perfect. They may be wrong. We may be corrected, and that's okay, right? And that's part of the journey, especially as we move in venture and we're trying to, solidify that and try to make real change, not just, I think that the protests are an awareness point, but we need to really look at the million ways this is ingrained in what we're doing. So thank you for that, sharing that. So on that note, can you share a little bit more about, I love the, what we can do in venture. We can look at our portfolio ex ante, right? We can tangibly look at where we're investing, where we haven't investing, just maybe even put it out there, no matter how good or bad it is, right? Just to shine a light. What more do you believe we can do for the Black community in venture at this time?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I did post something on on Twitter. It's no longer a pipeline problem. It's no longer of like, we don't have access to these founders. There's plenty of founders. I have, 3 different lists. It includes Black and Brown, but there's specifically for the Black community. As VC investors, being very intentional about your deal flow. And I said, in the next few days, weeks, months, reaching out to these founders. And I got a lot of positive things. There was one woman that said, yes, but realize that we're going through a lot right now, and we're inundated with a bunch of, responses, and we're grieving. We're struggling right now. And I was like, okay, I appreciate you saying that. And so it's not that you have to like call 25 founders that are Black and say, oh my gosh, let me hear your pitch. But I believe, in as you're doing your natural deal sourcing, which many VCs do, which almost all VCs do, and, either going through your list of founders that you've passed on or that you really liked earlier that, came from this background, and reaching back out to them, Or I've actually had a few investors that I sent some of my founders in the companies that were Black founders reach back out and say, hey, can we chat? I know that they're still raising, right? Not just for the sake of a conversation because they're busy, but it could fit their thesis, and they're more aware, and they want to have a conversation. I think this is going to be a long process, and so having looking at your deal flow process and saying, all right, well, how many founders are we reaching out to? How many Black founders are coming through the door? And if it's less than 5-10%, which it mostly will be for most funds, it's like, okay, let's come up with a plan. Who do we need to talk to? The Black VC network, I'm Black in tech. What organizations have committed to investing or have invested in these founders? And look through a list of founders that it's not that hard. It's like, okay, if I'm a Series A investor, I will look to see who raised a seed round 12 months ago, right? Or 18 months ago, and they're probably going to be ready soon. So let me start building that conversation. And if it fits in with my thesis, let me reach out to them and be very thoughtful about it. Again, not for the sake of just reaching out and saying, oh, I want to be a good citizen, but being very intentional about it. And if some Black founders right now don't reach back out, okay, right? I mean, you don't understand what they're going through, and if they're going through if they don't want to respond to them, that they don't respond to you. But it shouldn't just be a now thing. It shouldn't just be for the next few weeks. It should be integrated into your entire process. And one of the things that I also mentioned was that if they have a good experience with you, even if you don't invest, even if they don't want to invest with you, you to invest with them, if they have a good experience with you, they will recommend other founders, other Black founders to your network. And so, and I said office hours, people do office hours and free passes, and some founders have said, well, I don't want charity, right? I get it. And that was part of my whole thesis of starting my fund. It was like, I advised these founders, and I did office hours, but it was like, they needed capital, right? And so I've said, write a check or make the hire, which I didn't take it from, it was from another VC. But, even within your portfolio companies, if a lot are looking to hire, if you are committed to helping them hire their first Black, Black employee, then, reach out to your network. VCs are, I would think we're pretty smart, like reach out, work with either recruiters or LinkedIn. My husband, who's also a CEO of a company, looks on LinkedIn all the time to find, his next team member. So I think it's just being really intentional about it, and not losing sight of like, oh, I'm going to say the wrong thing, or, I don't want to face the conversation that we're not diverse, or I'm going to do it for the next 4 weeks and then, great, I feel good about myself. No, you need to integrate it as part of your investment process, as part of your culture, as part of your hiring plan.
That was great. It's like those are definitely actionable for the investors listening. You're just as some of the recap is your deal flow and write the check or make the hire. That's I love it.
Right.
That's put your money where your mouth is. So
I would say write the check and make the hire.
And there you go. And not just now, but as you go forward. So
right.
Thank you, Samara. This again, Samara Hernandez, founding partner at Chingona Ventures. Thank you for joining us. This was RBL1 Live, and please join us to listen to badass investors and founders every week, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So thanks again, Samara.
Thank you.